Great. Okay, it's 7 my time. So let's get started. Welcome everyone. Welcome everyone that joined this session as a participant, but also welcome everyone that joined via the live stream. We're very happy to have you here. So my name is Paula Garcia Rodriguez. I'm here with my colleague Emma Kilcoyne and my also colleague, let's say our guest speaker, Eric Girski from UN Global Compact. So Emma and I both work for Fugro. Fugro, for those who are not aware, is a geo data specialist that collects environmental data in the marine and land environment. And we're also both part of the board for the private industry ECOPS task team. ECOPS is Early Career Ocean Professionals, which we'll tell you a bit more about later as well. And then Eric Girski here is from UN Global Compact. He has been leading the UN Global Compact's ocean work since 2018. And he'll tell us more about the UN Global Compact a bit further down the line as well. But we're here to talk about best practices to foster strong industry science partnerships. So collaboration is a very big keyword in the ocean science sphere. So it's talked about in all the different ocean science conferences. It was a very big keyword in the Ocean Decade Conference in April in Barcelona. It's been picked up all over, and collaboration is indeed very important. So only by working together can we actually improve the knowledge that we have of our oceans and therefore also the ocean's health. One of these collaborations that are very crucial and needed are industry and science partnerships. So to date, private industry has a rather small representation compared to other sectors at these types of conferences and initiatives, for example. It's growing and the demand is there, but there's still more that we can do. And this is what we want to talk to you about today. So in this session, we first want to discuss why these industry and science partnerships are necessary as a little refresher. Then we'll highlight two examples of what efforts currently exist, so the UN Global Compact as well as within the Ocean Decade. And finally, we'll have an interactive session with you with the Mentimeter in terms of understanding what best practices are, what your experiences are with these partnerships, and where the gaps are between what our ideal scenario would be and the current efforts that are going on. So, here we go. So why are industry science partnerships necessary in the first place? So the very obvious one is that all stakeholders need to work together to improve our ocean's health. The private industry does have quite a big stake. The maritime private industry has an influence on the ocean and can also have an influence on the ocean's health and adapting its own practices. And working together with research has many benefits. So for the private industry, sustainable practices, industries can benefit from scientific expertise to adopt more sustainable practices to ensure that their operations in the ocean are as sustainable as possible and to really minimize the risk and the impact, the negative impact maritime industries can have on the ocean. This includes, for example, reducing pollution, managing fisheries sustainably, minimizing the impact of offshore drilling as well as shipping to minimize impact on marine ecosystems. Another important part for industry science partnerships is that joint efforts can influence policy, can support policy development and implementation, and can really help shape policies and regulations that protect the ocean's health. So when industry and science present a united front, they can more effectively advocate for measures that balance economic interest with environmental protection. Furthermore, we have innovation, also a very big keyword, innovative technologies. So collaboration between industry and science can really lead to the development of new technologies that monitor and protect marine environments. So monitoring and technologies for monitoring is very close to Fugro's core business and very close to our heart. For example, industries involved in maritime operations can work with scientists to create advanced sensors and autonomous underwater vehicles for ocean exploration. And these innovations also help in furthering our understanding of the ocean, so in collecting data, for example, and also replacing technologies or instruments previously used that had a bigger impact on the marine environment. Impact is the next one, so large-scale impact. Industry science partnerships can create the momentum needed for large-scale impact. So many smaller scale initiatives happen around the world. What we really need to have a proper way of improving our ocean's health is to take all of these initiatives and scaling them up. This is often very difficult due to funding for research, for example, and having industry science partnerships can really support that. So by working together, these sectors can implement wide-reaching initiatives that benefit the ocean, the climate, and also the people. We have shared knowledge and resources as well. So industries often have access to extensive resources and data. And this in turn can be invaluable for scientific research. So by sharing this information, scientists can gain deeper insights into ocean health and also develop more effective conservation strategies. Capacity development is also something that can really flourish, let's say, in industry science partnerships, vice versa. So industry can support science, for example, if a Fugro vessel, for example, would go out to collect data, to take scientists on board for them to really understand how is the data collected and learn in that environment. And on the other hand, also teaching industry what the best practices are in data collection, if we run with that. So these are some of the main reasons why industry science partnerships are crucial and really support ocean sciences. If you think that there are some that we didn't mention in this slide, please feel free to put them in the chat or in the question and answer. We really want to make this session interactive and hear also your opinions on this matter. So let's get into what current efforts exist to really bring industry and science together to improve industry's operations and industry standards. We first have the UN Global Compact. I will hand over to you, Eric, for you to present the very important and valuable work of the UN Global Compact and UN Global Compact Ocean Stewardship Coalition.
Thank you so much, Paula, and a very inspiring introduction on this extremely important topic. And I couldn't agree more. A lot is going on, and the potential to do more is enormous, and the consequences are, of course, very important. You can show the first slide. I don't know if I can control that, but this is the UN building. And actually, the story of the UN Global Compact work on the ocean really starts on this end. Before taking on the role at the Global Compact heading the ocean work, I was working in the Norwegian Shipowner Association, very operational shipping organization, 150 ship owner working together, the fourth largest fleet in the world, very competitive, but also very cooperative. That was the nature of the Norwegian shipping fleet back then. And one of the leading companies, PGS, is a seismic company. They were trawling the world oceans, doing seismic surveys on the seafloor for oil and gas. And in one of our meetings, they said, Eric, we have all this excess data. We have so much insights on the seafloor that we don't, which is not contracted, which is not confidential, that we can share openly. What can we do with it? And I was working in that role in private sector, and we started actually trying to understand. This was back in 2017-16. What can we do with all this data? And we contacted the UN, called the headquarters in the UN, and of course we immediately understood that the UN is a very complex body with, I think we counted more than 25 UN entities with some formal role on the oceans. But anyway, we ended up at the UN headquarters at the Ocean conference back in 2017, handing over a massive hard drive to the UN Global Compact, actually, as a start of a collaboration from the private sector to the UN with 20 years of seismic service data. Of course, that hard drive still stands in my office in the UN after I took up that position, because assembling this data in the right UN entity with the right formats for the right use is not very easy. But of course, we have moved very far since then. But that was actually the origin of this collaboration, because we saw that in the UN we needed much more private sector collaboration on this big global common, the ocean. As we all know, most of the collaboration, most of the activities in the ocean are private sector. Fisheries, shipping, all of these things, most of the infrastructure in the ocean is privately run and operated. Quite well regulated, some of it, at least the shipping side, but still it's private assets and capacities and insights. And in these companies, there's lots of R&D. And that is a super big potential. And I'll revert to that. But that was our part in joining the UN and starting this platform for ocean collaboration between governments, private sector, academia, and governments to really drive sustainable solutions. Quick UN in the nutshell, and UN Global Compact in a nutshell. We're part of the UN headquarters. Guterres is our chairman. Sanda Ujambo is Assistant Secretary General to the UN. She's our CEO in a way. We have over 70 local offices all over the world, with around 25,000 companies joining us since 2000, when this was established by Kofi Annan. And I usually say that we have all these companies not because we are good at marketing or PR, but because companies, they want to understand what is the pathway for sustainability. And they want to be part of that journey in this, understanding it and defining it. And of course, if you go to the next slide, we are built on the 10 principles. Really, when you join the UN Global Compact, your CEO sign up a commitment to report on your environmental footprint, your social footprint, your governance footprint annually and on a reporting form. And really, this is the foundation to understand how can we deliver on the 17 SDGs. These are unified. All governments are behind the 17 SDGs, but of course, they're designed for governments. So we need to make sure we have a practical guidance for companies as well. And very importantly, on this, for the ocean, it's not only life below water, SDG 14, because as all ocean-related companies and experts know, the ocean is so important for climate action, for biodiversity, for responsible consumption and production, for economic growth, for livelihoods, for peace and strong institutions, and so forth. It's important for all of the 17 SDGs. And we have a special responsibility for number 14, of course. Now, that said, we need, as I say in this slide, we need a very holistic approach for the ocean. And that was how we also started this project when we took up on the job back in 2018. We asked the academic community, what are the greatest threats and what are the greatest opportunities here? And of course, for the ocean health and well-being, the biggest threat is climate change. And it goes very fast. It has deep effects on the ocean, as I think most ocean scientists know. And secondly, it's of course runoffs from industry, cities, and agriculture. And then it's plastic pollution, all of them threatening the health of the ocean. Most of this is land originated. Most of this stems from land-based activities, but we can see it in the ocean. Ocean is the canary in the mine for the planet, and we see everything with an X factor in the ocean. The good thing about this is that more and more people understand this, but also more and more companies understand it. Both land-based companies and sea-based companies, they understand that their sustainability footprint is a risk factor. It's if they harm the environment, if they have social harm or a poor performance of governance, it will hurt their financial positions. It will be harder to get a loan or to issue a bond, which is a loan in a way, or for its own stock performance. And this is very important for us because we want to use the financial market as a discipliner of companies so that they can start understanding their sustainability footprint in a science-based way. So that's the logic of our work. Now we can jump to the next slide. And that's why we see also a ramp up of R&D and in companies and a much more collaborative environment, not only competitive, where the nature of business is business, but people understand that the nature of business is good business. You have to behave well if you're going to be attractive as a company. And not only that, we see also that employees and leaders themselves really, really want to do the right thing. It's a massive shift from being something from a sustainability communications report in the annual report somewhere to actually now sustainability is part of the daily work of the chief financial officer. And the good thing about chief financial officers, they like numbers. And people who like numbers, they go to science because you can't guess this. You have to check. And the best with science, you can have second-party opinion and peer reviews to verify this. So we are very happy to see that most of the companies work with, like Fugro and others, are really taking this seriously and engaging much more directly with science than just a few years back. And this is being amplified through governmental collaborations, international collaborations like the UN, and of course NGOs supporting this work. I would like to say there are a few levels that is important. It's a journey working with science because everything should be science-based, but we also know that science can be endless. We can always do more science, but what we see is that science has become a foundational starting point for policymaking and business decisions in a much more higher degree than before. And I think it's now become, with a decade of ocean science, with this very good example of the Ocean Decade Corporate Data Group, it has become a starting point for setting business standards. The best example I like to bring forward is the science-based targets for climate action. By most pension funds, this is the gold standard. This is the starting question for any investment conversation they have with companies. Are you a signatory to SBTi? Have you set targets? Have an independent monitor evaluated them? And TNFD and class societies like LR and DNV are all instruments in bringing this forward. Science-based understanding of the impact of a wind farm, of fishery practices, or shipping technologies are extremely important. And now we also see with the very good work of the high-level panel for sustainable blue economy, with all their blue papers, it's all very robust science-based policy recommendations. Well, we can complain that not many of them have been turned into practice or realpolitik, but we are pressuring them to start seeing that happening in the member state of the panel. Our main objective is then to get this into forcible and well-working regulatory mechanisms so that IMO, which is really a good body for regulating shipping, and in a way beyond, but we can see also other regulatory mechanism working well, that these decisions are science-based. If we had better science on the scrubber, the exhaust mechanism that was introduced in shipping a few years back to reduce SOx and NOx, if we had better science, we would know that it could not go through like the way it did. It should have been a closed scrubber system so that you don't just take out the SOx and NOx and splash it into the sea. Then, it's just not very efficient and you haven't really achieved anything. But you could have a science-based solution which really captured this and took it away in a measurable way. Very good. So we try to do these recommendations for companies, what is your sustainability journey? What is science-based? How can you take part in this? In our guidances down the bottom right here of this slide. We have these guidances for every industry in the ocean, and we try to update them at a regular time together with companies and academia. Next slide, please. And I see time is running fast here, but I'll try to keep my time.
All good. Take your time.
Okay, very good, very good. So I think also as we move forward, we also have to be honest that companies like Fugro and others with capacity, with a history of working well with scientists are performing well. What we are, I think part of the next step is really expanding this in a more geographically balanced collaboration. And I think the Air Center is a good way of bringing north and south of the Atlantic together in these data sharing initiatives. And being, speaking with you since the beginning almost, I think it's been a great journey to see how that has grown. We need similar regional alternatives around the world. We are establishing what we call the ocean centers as part of our country networks. We have networks in 70 countries, but in some of the dots you can see here, we are now setting up a collaborative capacity for governments, science, and private sector to share insights so that we can inform companies what initiatives like the Ocean Decade data sharing practice, Air Center or others are available for them to join in. So this will be a microphone for good stuff and also a listening piece so that we can get data from Philippines or Ghana or Brazil or the US as part of our systemic effort to be global and balanced. Next slide. In a way, a summing up of how we try to then bring this into industry standards. And this is something we talked to Fugro and others about. The licensing process of offshore wind is a good example. It's not globally regulated. It's up to countries to license it and how to share data, what data are they based on. And it's a bit cumbersome, to say the least, when different governments have different ways of practicing this. It's actually hampering the acceleration of this enormous important industry. And it also blindfolds both governments, scientists, and the industry on the real consequences when we are not able to compare better some of these data sets and the impacts, especially when we try to improve them by setting nature-based standards for offshore wind, etc. So we try to bring this not only together in standards, but we also try to bring this forward in IMO, in the UN General Assembly, and other authority bodies, and the G20 coming up later, to show that collaboration is really fostering good competition. We need level playing fields. So this is a taste of what we do. I think we are a UN, we are an open door. We would like everybody to use the UN Global Compact as a platform for collaboration and advancing standards which are science-based. And again, thank you to all the ones who are driving this forward. I think there are so many hardworking scientists that the private sector really should continue to discover and collaborate more with. And I'm encouraged to see that that's really happening, and more people are seeking to ensure that what they do is right, going in the right direction, and verifiable. So that's the UN Global Compact in a nutshell, I think, and part of our work going on. Thank you so much. Looking forward to any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Eric. That was very interesting, very good to learn more about the invaluable work the UN Global Compact has been doing so far, especially for the marine environment. So if anyone has any questions, they can post them in the question and answer section of the session. If you want, you can, of course, also raise your hand, and then Tanya will enable you to speak. So you can also pose your question directly. Feel free to do so throughout the whole session. If we don't have any questions so far, Eric, I actually have a question for you. Sorry for not anticipating this question, but I thought that while you were
Very good.
presenting. So you said that quite a few companies are becoming more and more curious and open about learning about these science-based targets, regulations, policies, etc., and that they're slowly adapting their ways on how they do business and how they're taking this on. I'm curious, how willing do you have the sense that they are to really adapt these businesses? And do they do it mainly due to regulations? Is there also an inherent cultural movement? Yeah, how has that development formed?
Oh, very, very important question. And I think this is something that we work on every day, and meeting all kinds of companies from business to consumer good producers to pure supply chain actors. All of them see an increasing pressure, not only by EU regulations, but by employees, by consumers, by investors, insurers, of understanding the risk picture. And if you are involved in fishery sector, you're facing this every day. It's not enough anymore to have the MSC or ASC stamp on your produce. You have to document your supply chain as good as possible, and you have to improve performance over a year on labor standards, on use of feed, on use of medical products in your supply chain, on the use of the packaging, and so forth. And that's a very, very good trend. We see it from Asia to the US to Latin America and Europe. I think some of the mature or like advanced industries like shipping or energy, it's even more clear. These are large scale, high asset, big asset operators. And of course, when you build a new ship today, you have to know what is the legal landscape 20 years from now. But because this ship has to run the oceans for 30 years. So I was just in Shanghai last month in the inauguration of the world's largest car carrier ship, roll-on, roll-off ship, civilian ship, ammonia ready, because they know that soon it has to consume green energy in its journey. And while they did these investments, the investors were very positive. This increased the value of the company, this new investments. And that's significant signal from the market, that the market understand regulations will come. If you build now a pure bunker oil ship, you're not gonna get an extra value. You might get a decreased value of that ship because it's a stranded asset, as we say in finance. But if you build something which is future-proof or more likely future-proof, that's a potential benefit in the financial market. Extremely interesting. And this also, go for infrastructure in ports. When we see Ørsted's blue bond, we see suddenly a whole slate of investments in blue bonds that are targeting nature positive or climate positive ocean investments.
Very interesting indeed.
Mm.
And another follow-up question, and then when we go to the question that is in the chat. So outside of engaging with these science-based targets and regulations, do you see willingness or a wish for private industry to engage with research and science even further? So for example, with the corporate data group, that's a very big, important starting step. Do you see awareness that that is a possibility? Or desire even?
Absolutely. I think everybody's still grappling with a large scale model. I think there are different ways of collaborating. You have like Hub Ocean or like Google's for the ocean, where you have like more like a private public partnership on data sharing. And then you have the IOC Ocean Decade collaboration, where more companies join in to understand how can we make it lean to share data, both for public purpose, but also for the use, second-hand use and greater good of all companies together. I think we have a long way to go. I think we should try to be very ambitious on this, and I think this is the benefit of companies, but they might not understand that it's investment of time. and understanding the legal, capacity of their data and so on. But we try to use our network, our membership units to promote this, because I think everybody should start there. I think everybody has different data sets and different insights, and there is an appetite for it, and hopefully we can get even more now. We have the UN Ocean Conference coming up in June and other milestone events where we can really get the drive so that people commit over time to form this and to build it and make it successful. And I see there is one question in the chat on the stewardship centers, and that's in Oslo. That's where I am based currently when I'm not in New York. So it's very close to Sweden. The Nordics are very active on the ocean agenda, and absolutely happy to connect with anybody in Sweden on this as well. But we have a global compact network in Sweden, which is also very active on the Östersjön, the Baltic Sea.
Great. Thank you so much, Eric, for the presentation and the answers. Very insightful. Okay, let's move on to, let me get my notes again. Here you go. To the Ocean Decade and the Corporate Data Group. So I'm very positive that most, if not all of you, have heard of the Ocean Decade. And Eric has also talked about it in his presentation, but just a little recap. The Ocean Decade was basically created to increase our knowledge of the ocean. So, as mentioned by Eric, the UN adopted the 17 Sustainable Development Goals for the 2030 Agenda in 2015. And SDG 14 is all about life underwater. It is currently actually the least funded of all SDGs. So that is why the United Nations tasked UNESCO to develop a 10-year plan to boost the scientific understanding that we have of the ocean, and also to develop solutions to sustainably and equitably manage our ocean resources. So this 10-year plan resulted in the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, or the Ocean Decade for short. The Ocean Decade was launched in 2021 and is comprised of a series of endorsed actions that allow different stakeholders to work together towards a series of desired results or challenges that in turn all build towards specific outcomes and impacts. So there are 4 different actions highlighted in this infographic. Outside of these 4 different actions, there's also working groups and connections that also lead to reaching the challenges, to finding solutions for these challenges, and to reach the desired outcomes. One of these working groups is the Corporate Data Group. So the Corporate Data Group was established in February 2023. It is a group that encompasses currently 10 members from private industry sectors. These sectors include fisheries, energy, infrastructure, etc. So sectors that have operations in the marine environment, that, for example, collect data in the marine environment, and generally can have a high influence and support ocean science as well. The main goal of the Corporate Data Group is to unlock privately held ocean data for science and sustainable ocean management. So another key word that I hear in all of these conferences and meetings and discussions, aside from collaboration, is data. We need more data. We cannot find solutions for something we do not understand logically. One of the things that is discussed a lot is how to collect new data, to have innovation, to get new technologies in order to be able to collect data that we haven't collected yet. What is very common is that we know more about the moon than we know about the oceans. But another part of data is also to unlock already existing data. For example, these private sector companies that have been working in the marine environment for decades, they collect data for their own projects, and then they finalize these projects, and then the data sits on probably first paper and then hard drives on their shelves, never to be touched again. If we would be able to unlock that data and make it available to the public and to research specifically, that would be a tremendous step forward. So the overall goal of the corporate data group is really to understand the obstacles to data sharing, because the more obvious one, let's say, could be for someone, especially outside of private industry, is that maybe private industry is not willing to share that data. But even if they are, if they're commit to sharing their data, going from there, there's many barriers to solve before the data is actually available to the public as well. So it works on finding solutions to making these certain data sets publicly available to science in the context of the Ocean Decade. So this is an Ocean Decade endorsed working group. This includes developing best practices for industry to share data, as well as changing the actual culture towards data sharing in all sectors, including in academia and science, but starting with the private sector. So what we mean with changing the culture is that, imagine if there would be a regulatory framework that would encourage or demand, make it mandatory for every company that collects data in a territorial zone or exclusive economic zone to, after the project's completion, to make that data available. The overall tasks and goals that the corporate data group works on are threefold. So first is to develop a strategy focusing on processes, legal frameworks, practical mechanisms, business models, and best practices for industrial companies to provide access to privately held ocean geodata in support of implementing the Ocean Decade. Secondly, we have establishing a process to systematically map critical data needs of the Ocean Decade, of these different decade actions that we have, challenges to existing privately held data sets, and find pathways for these data sets into decade endorsed programs and projects. So really connecting the work of the corporate data group with all of the different activities that are happening in the Ocean Decade as well. There are actually a few more tasks. I only put 3 on the slides, but I'm telling you a few more. So another one is to provide recommendations for actions to close the gaps in data types, for data geography, observing systems, data and information management requirements, and data and information products and services. Oh, that was the wrong way. Then we have engaging with other stakeholders within the Ocean Decade. So this is not only for private industry with research and with the Ocean Decade specifically, but also with non-governmental organizations, with governmental organizations, which is one of the bigger barriers that I'll be touching upon as well, is that the collaboration with governments is crucial for data to be released. So engaging with other stakeholders to actively identify areas for coordination and collaboration with corporate ocean data holders. And finally, actively promote awareness of the Ocean Decade objectives and goals among private sector businesses working in the marine environment and holding ocean geodata. The corporate data group currently only has 10 members, and there's so many more companies out there with data that could also start working on their own data sharing. So some of the learnings that the group has had so far is the data barriers to ocean data sharing that we've identified, as well as some first solutions to these barriers. So one of the main barriers is data ownership is often unclear or spread over multiple parties. So for example, if a contractor collects data for a client in a territorial zone, it's not quite clear who has the power to say, yes, we'll release that data. Then we have commercial sensitivity. So that is a more obvious one, that often data is too commercially sensitive to be shared. And then there's data that is not commercially sensitive and can be shared more easily. So for example, mid-ocean data, let's say salinity of the water, ocean currents, etc., that is collected alongside the data that is needed for their projects, there is less sensitivity around this data and it's more easy to share this data. Then we have liabilities. So use of data by third parties could lead to potential liability claims if the data were to be made public. Technical limitations is where to share this data. There's a lack of interoperable platforms for private industry to share data. Not necessarily a lack of, there's many different platforms, but there's no one big platform. So it's very hard to have an overview of where to share which type of data. And there's some platforms only for biodiversity and some platforms only for bathymetry. And it's quite confusing to know where to put what. And also then how to actually share that data. So there's different data types. There's different commercial sensitivity that requires different formats as well. So that's also quite complex in itself. And then finally, there's restrictions on release of data from national jurisdictions. So there's permission required from certain national governments to share data collected within their jurisdictions or exclusive economic zones. And not every country has the same process to have that data shared. So that is incredibly complex if you have data from different national jurisdictions to know what to do in which country. So learnings about these barriers. For the data ownership, you have on the right the visual with where the territorial zone, the territorial sea is, exclusive economic zone, etc. So for territorial sea and exclusive economic zone, the national government has sovereign rights on data collected in their national waters. They have to give the final approval for that data to be shared. The UN Charter of the Law of the Sea sets the rules for who has jurisdiction in different parts of the ocean, but it actually does not specifically reference data. So that's why in the high seas, it's still unclear who has data ownership and who has final say of saying that this data can be shared. So a potential solution to this is to include contractual clauses that require private industry to share data. For commercial sensitivity, one of the solutions or the proposals that we have is to share data with lower resolution. So not that the highest resolution collected, to share data to platforms or models that don't make data publicly available, only the platform. So they basically feed the data into the platform or the model, and that is then made publicly available. And also including a clause that there's no wrongful use of data and not causing harm to anybody or anything. For technical limitations, we have identified a few platforms. So for bathymetry, for example, there's a platform, or there's a Ocean Decade endorsed activity called CBAT 2030. I'll talk about that as well. For biodiversity, there's OBPS and GBIF. There's a few bigger ones that are also endorsed or supported by the Ocean Decade. And how? The corporate data group is preparing guidelines that include really step-by-step and all the learnings that we're having for these different types of platforms. So we're using 3 use cases for the development of these guidelines. For bathymetry data, so basically how the ocean floor is shaped, for biodiversity data and met-ocean data. So why is this important? Why can private industry actually support ocean science with, for example, releasing bathymetry data? So I want to paint a picture. This rendering is of a previously unknown seamount Fugro recently discovered during a transit between Mexico and Hawaii in the Eastern Pacific Ocean. And this underwater mountain that is now hopefully also for you coming into view, it reaches the same height above the surrounding seafloor as Mount Fuji does above water. So the discovery of seamounts like these is crucial to understanding the biodiversity, ocean circulation, geological processes of the deep ocean. And it really underscores the importance of continued ocean exploration and mapping efforts. So imagine if we didn't even know something as significant as the size of Mount Fuji on our seafloor maps, imagine what else we might be missing. So we know that our mountain ranges influence our climate. And by understanding the characteristics of these land formations, we have been able to predict weather patterns. So why would that be any different underwater? So by enhancing our knowledge and understanding of the seafloor, we can really better understand key geological processes, adopt best practices for resource management, make informed policy decisions, and ultimately ensure a sustainable future for the planet. So, as commonly known, the ocean makes up 70% of the Earth's surface, but we have explored only a fraction of the seafloor, leaving most of this critical ecosystem literally in the dark. So in this picture, you can actually see the lines basically represent what has been high quality data that has been collected and it has been fed into seabed 2030. Seabed 2030, as mentioned, is a Ocean Decade endorsed program that collects bathymetry data and relies mostly on contributions from private industry, for example, to create a map of the seabed. So when seabed 2030 was launched in 2017, only 6% of the ocean floor had been mapped to modern standards. Today, 25% have been mapped, which is already a considerable improvement. But that also means that 75% of the seabed is currently still unmapped by direct observations, with most of the world's ocean bathymetry actually derived from satellite gravity measurements. So, for example, if you look at Google Earth and you see the relief of the seafloor, it is primarily derived from these satellite gravity measurements, which are only an estimation and really not resolute. So bathymetry data from multi-beam bathymetry, for example, has a much higher resolution. So as you can see, we still have a long way to go. And Fugro also contributes to seabed 2030, has contributed 2.6 million square kilometers so far, with data that has been collected in transit. So how we do it and how seabed 2030 supports the collection of this data is that before the vessel takes off, we can check what data has already been collected, check that against the route that we want to take, and see if like a slightly change of the route would enable us to collect bathymetry data that hasn't been collected before. So that was the corporate data group. If you have any questions, of course, feel free to speak up, to write in the chat. I don't see any so far. Okay, no worries. Then a little self-promotion for M&I. We are part of the board of the private industry ECOPS task team. So ECOPS is an early career ocean professional network under the Ocean Decade, which really serves to empower youth and early careers, empower them in the ocean science sector, and to highlight our voice and not only improve capacity development in our own knowledge of this, but also bring us into the whole conversation, because the Ocean Decade lasts until 2030, and then the legacy needs to be carried on. So that is when early careers will be in the height of our careers. So that's why this network is really very, very important and crucial. And what we have identified is that many activities around this program so far were from or for academia and the private industry. There was a gap for private industry. So we created this task team together with two other colleagues in our board, it's not only a Fugro task team, this is really global. The QR code will link you to the website of the task team. There's more information there, and you can also register there. And we're really looking for anyone that identifies as an ECOP, so within the first 10 years of their career, ocean-related career, and not only for people that are in the private industry, but also for anyone that is just interested in how the private industry really contributes to ocean science. So what we're talking about here, that is very much what we want to talk about in this task team as well. So I hope many of you will join. We only just kicked off, and we have hopefully many interesting speakers to come and conversations to have, and the kickoff that we had was very engaging so far already. So yeah, that are the different initiatives that we wanted to present to you today. There's many more out there, but these are the closest to our hearts, let's say. And now it is over to you. So get out your phones because we have a Mentimeter for you, which I will share with you now. Here we go. Okay, can you see this? Yes, perfect. Okay, so you can either scan the QR code or go to menti.com and then use the code at the top of the screen. And then we will have a few questions for you, but we also really encourage direct participation. So if you have anything that you want to contribute, I'll ask a few times throughout as well. By speaking to us, please feel free to do so. Okay, I'll wait a tiny bit more to see if more people join. So now we really want to learn what your own experience is with partnerships between science and industry, to see if you believe this is possible, if you've already seen successful ones, if you have any concerns, then what things you think are challenges or the main barriers to these partnerships. And then ultimately also identifying the gap between these two. Okay, I'll go ahead. There's a few questions. So the first one to start us off likely is what is your professional sector? So really understand which part of this conversation you come from. Okay. Great, interesting. Okay. Mostly research. Okay, I'll wait. Still more answers coming in. I'm curious what the one other is. I'm not sure if the person is part of the participation here or in the live viewing, but if you can share, that would be very interesting. Okay. Good. Let's move on to the next question. Do you believe it is possible to foster strong industry science partnerships? Interesting. Okay. Quite happy to see that most of it is in the left part, in my left part of the diagram. So generally, yes, many barriers indeed. Keep that in mind. The next question I think is going to be about those barriers. Okay, perfect. Let's continue. Indeed. So what main barriers are there for successful industry science partnerships? This is a word cloud. Okay, I see a question or a note here. We shouldn't generalize industry. Industry is very diverse. That's indeed very true. This was actually something with the task team that we discussed quite a lot how to call us. And we varied between private industry, private sector, business, which are very nuanced differences. Yeah, with private industry, I had the feeling we encompassed businesses, but also industry itself and a part of the sector that operates in the marine environment as well. But if you have an alternative suggestion, please feel free to let us know. Always keen to hear about other people's opinions on this. Okay, let's see. So business interest, economics, okay. Different priorities, different interests. Okay, that one comes up quite often. Capitalism, incentives, cohesive reporting, transparency. Yeah, okay. Very interesting. Is there anyone that would like to elaborate on any of these points? If so, I think you can raise your hand and then Tanya will unlock you. Just in case. You can also put it in the chat if you'd rather do that. Different vocabularies. Okay, so a lack of clear communication or communication that both understand, if I interpret that correctly. Proper governance structure would help address many of these, indeed. Yeah. Great. Okay, effort requirement. Okay, also curious to hear more about that. What exactly is meant by effort requirement? Okay, good. Then I think we can move on to the next question. So these two questions that are following are very similar. This one, what are the main benefits for science to have a strong science-industry partnership? And the next one will be for industry. So really, we've talked in the beginning why are these partnerships important in general for the public and for our ocean. But how do you believe that these both stakeholders, let's say, could... Oh, Pierre, you're here. Please go ahead.
Yeah, hi, thank you very much. Very interesting session, close to my heart. We could talk about that for a very long time. I would just like to say that it's based on my experience, it's very important to try to find the common ground, right? So talking about obstacles, talking about differences is a challenging entry. So what you rather want to do instead is go as high as you need to in order to find and identify the common goals, and then start building from there. That is so important, because what I concluded in a publication actually is that I think ultimately there is not a real contradiction between science and industry. I'm of the opinion that actually if you go high enough, there is no competition, because academia, I rather refer to academia than science, has as goals societal impact, knowledge generation, to just name the two major ones. Whereas industry obviously follows economic success, but also sustainability aspects. And both of them has sectoral strength. So that is a fantastic basis for collaboration. So if you always like bring that back to your mind, you have fantastic starting conditions. There is the obstacles are then diminishing against that backdrop. But the main challenge is that you need to talk openly with each other, and that is the critical point. Very often this does not happen. Even at conferences, even at dedicated meetings, there is not a real open, transparent discussions about what do you want, what do I want, and how can we get together. This is very seldom. Yeah, just as a little input.
Thank you so much. Very, very important, very valid point. Great contribution. Thanks, Per. Great. Okay, I see we have a few answers in the meantime for the questions on main benefits for science. Okay, creating common goals, accessing expensive data and data sharing, indeed, very important one, and lengthily discussed with the corporate data group presentation. Up-to-date knowledge, indeed. Sustainable funding. I guess funding is quite a big part, funding opportunities. Yeah. Yeah, that is quite a big part, and probably the most, or the first one many think about as well in this type of partnership. Practical relevance, enable use of new finding. Yeah. Great. User engagement. Latest technologies, innovation, that is a very big part as well. Yeah. Okay. Anyone that would like to comment on any of these? No? Oh, okay. All good. Then
Pierre, do you still have a question? I see your hand is raised.
No,
maybe it's
sorry.
No? Okay, perfect. Sorry, just checking.
Thanks, Emma. Okay, great. Then we move to the next question. Same question, but for industry. Give it a minute. Scientific understanding, evidence-based decisions, and up-to-date knowledge. Recruitment potential. Yeah. I think this is actually an undervalued one, that this makes companies an employer of choice as well. Alignment. Okay. Yeah, great input. Some overlap as well with the previous question, not all of it, but that's also important, that the benefits to both can also be the same, or that the relationship benefits both in similar ways as well. Okay, great. Then I believe we continue. Okay, that's the heart of the session. How can these partnerships be fostered, in your opinion? What do you believe? So if you see the challenges that you've raised and the benefits to both, how would you overcome these challenges? So Piri, you already raised very important points in that regard, communication and same ground. What are other important aspects, or how can you reach more straightforwardness in terms of really identifying what are the gains or the wishes of these different partners? I have a few points on this question myself in the presentation. There will also be the last input, but I'm very curious to hear what other people think about this point. Yeah, green blue washing, I think that's a very valid point and something probably many people keep in mind when it comes to this topic. Organization or platform matching researchers to industries. That's very interesting. I'm not aware of anything like this existing at the moment. I do know of something similar that was presented at the Ocean Decade Conference with funding opportunities and research that needed funding. And that was also a slide and match, basically. It was a very interesting presentation. So maybe something like that for industry and academia and science could work as well. Yeah. Okay, facilitate collaboration. That's true. Question is how? Governance structure that can manage interests across disconnects and divergence across stakeholder groups. Yeah. Through joint ventures and accelerators. Identify common goals and interact transparently. So there's a comment in the chat that as part of Ocean Accelerator did something like this between academia and startups, but not large industry partners per se. It's interesting. Yeah, Sustainable Oceans Alliance. That's very interesting. That could be something that could be looked into to do something with like this for industry partners as well. If someone needs a startup idea, here you go. Okay, great. I think I'll close this off then. I think you can still respond if something still sparks an idea. You can still include that in the presentation, I believe. I will quickly go to the PowerPoint presentation again. Sure. For my last slide on best practices, a few points that have been previously discussed. This is, of course, with an open end and much to be done, and also other points to be incorporated as well. So this is also why we wanted to build the session interactively and get your input as well, because especially coming from private industry, there's points that we miss from the academia's angle and vice versa as well. But then, yes, so mentioned many times, clear communication and shared goals. So really establishing open lines of communication and ensuring that both industry and science partners have a mutual understanding of goals and expectations, and goals of expectations not only for ocean science in general, but as you said, also from the other stakeholders' perspective. And understanding this common ground and then building on that common ground. collaborative frameworks, so governance structures, for example, developing frameworks that facilitate collaboration. So, for example, joint research initiatives or shared funding mechanisms, co-authored publications, so actual tangible actions and results of collaboration between science and industry. Then we have capacity building, which I have already mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, but really invest in training and capacity building programs to enhance the skills and knowledge of both industry professionals and scientists. And industry and science can really support each other in that way, and share the knowledge and how, because trainings are different in different types of organizations and in different sectors. So capacity building can really flourish even more when taking these different stakeholder groups into consideration. Then data sharing and standardization, very important one, the very tangible one as well, talked about quite a lot in the presentation already, and a few of you have mentioned it in the Mentimeter as well, but promoting the sharing of data and the use of standardized methodologies, that's also very important, to ensure consistency and reliability in research outcomes. And what's important here is also to make that data and the platforms that they're on interoperable. So to ensuring that if, for example, a data set is submitted to one platform, that it can also be accessed through different platforms or different models. Because otherwise, if it stays very segmented, it only helps a very small portion of the ocean science community, but not the public at large. Incentives for participation. So this is one of the concerns, main concerns that you have raised, which is very understandable and valid. So need to create incentives for industry participation. There can be different ones, can be, for example, tax benefits, recognition programs, opportunities for co-investment in research projects. These are a bit bigger and probably harder to attain, but just also highlighting the benefits to industry for such participation in industry science relationships. For example, being an employer of choice, having access to state-of-the-art knowledge through scientists, having access to ocean science leaders as well. Highlighting these over and over again, I think is also very valuable. Then regular workshops and conferences. So this is something that is already happening, organizing regular events to bring together stakeholders from both sectors to discuss challenges and share insights and develop new strategies, etc. There's a lot of conferences and workshops happening, and I've only been to a few myself or participated in a few myself, and I do have the feeling that there's a lot of very similar players in all of these conferences, but I feel like at every conference is like a small step further and further. So it's really going step by step, and sharing all the findings that have happened in the meantime. Policy and regulatory support. So advocating for policies and regulations that support collaborative efforts as well, and providing a conducive environment for partnerships. So we've only talked about industry science partnerships so far, but government, for example, is also a very important stakeholder and needs to be taken into account with these partnerships. And lastly, co-design. So whenever projects are being developed and created, to incorporate these different stakeholders in the design of these projects to ensure that there is very clear communication, there is clear understanding of what the goals are, etc. And if that happens from the very beginning onwards, then it's a lot easier to build on that and then reach successful completion of a project or a successful partnership, etc. So that was the last part of the presentation. I'll stop sharing my screen. If there are any more questions, please feel free to raise them in the chat, raise your hand, etc. Otherwise, I think Tanya actually shared the link to the private industry ECOPS task team as well. So if you feel like yourself or someone you know might be interested in joining that, we have a LinkedIn group as well, that we will send you an email to that you can join, and then we can keep this discussion going. And if you feel like you're maybe not an ECOP anymore, but you have something valuable that you would like to pass on to ECOPs, we're always looking for speakers as well. So very happy to connect and then perhaps have you as a guest speaker. Always good to learn. I see no further questions or raised hands. I'll stay on for a few more minutes if anyone has. Yes, here, please go ahead.
Yeah, it would be a pity to waste that time now, right? We've got 15 more minutes.
We do.
All right. So maybe I'd like to introduce that idea of the ocean enterprise a little bit, because there is a very clear connection to what we talk about here. So when I thought about how to improve science industry collaboration, etc., I more and more identified that the market we are in is not comparable to the market. I'm talking about the market of ocean observing, right? Is not on the same level as other markets and other industries around us. Because if we look at other sectors, other industry sectors, they are in a much different state than we are. And so I identified that we have many peculiarities in our field, how we interact with science, with academia, and how purchases happen, etc., etc. And so we identified that there are many things that could be improved to make this environment a little bit more healthy, with benefits for all stakeholders involved. And we could go into detail here, but I just think that this is a very important point that we should always bring back to our mind here, that despite the importance of the ocean and ocean data, the maturity level of the economic aspect of it is not where it should be in order to represent the importance for society. And there are these benefits for all the involved stakeholders, and many of them could be achieved if we came closer to each other and together represented the same ambitions towards the public, because we must appear more homogeneous in order to get the attention from policy, in order to also maybe channel more funds into the field. And then, we might be perceived as being a little bit more consistent. And we should be careful with diversifying ourselves more and more into different disciplines, into different trends, etc., because we must find more things to come together rather than individualize at that point.
Very true. Very, very true. Very important, and so simple in a way, still so difficult sometimes to accomplish, or for everyone to have that same understanding, sadly. Yeah.
And there's often this hen and egg question when we talk about product development, for example, and this is the difference between a customer push and a technology push. So the customer push would be, there must first be a significant demand for something before we start developing it. Or the other option would be, no, there must first be the advanced sensors before we can actually place the order. And so if everybody waits for the other, then we will not move ahead. And this is a reason why basically also academia and industry should work together in projects, in respective partnerships, to really carve out the value of this data, and then by that overcome that barrier.
Yeah, indeed. And actually start acting on what has been talked about for the last few years already. Very important point. Thanks, Per.
Pierre, you mentioned about SOA and that there was this sort of workshop or collaboration to advance these collaborations. So does this align with what you're saying with the latter, where you mentioned that having these, that we should move before there's customer demand, because the customer doesn't always, I suppose, know what.
I didn't make this SOA comment. I see
here
did
that you not?
Sarah made it. Maybe she can elaborate a little bit on that.
Yes.
That sounded interesting, for sure.
Oh, yes.
I did.
Yeah, excuse me, Brian.
All good.
Hi.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi, how are you?
Um,
Yeah, so I
Good.
was actually just looking into it again because so basically it's been it was so different startups can apply to SOA for funding through accelerator programs. And so while during my PhD at the University of Western Australia, there was two students who went to one of their SOA programs and they came back and were facilitating putting other PhD students in our graduate school, which is an Oceans graduate school, in touch with these startups that were basically looking for research expertise. And so it was like co-funded by SOA and the startups to basically pay PhD students to give their expertise for like short projects. So I participated in two of them. Which was a great experience. I don't know now that I look back at it, whether it was just something that these two students from my graduate school actually did at my university, and it's not something that's more broadly applied through the SOA Accelerator program. This did happen in 2021 and 2022. I'm also not 100% sure whether it's still ongoing because they both wrapped up their PhDs. And so it might have been a little bit of an outlier, but I think that kind of a setup was pretty cool. And I think with the startups being, small and applying for funding, they had a really great benefit from that. But I think it would be the same for bigger companies and corporations.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
That would be great. Look into that again to see if there's still something ongoing or not. Period. Oh, Emma, go ahead, please.
Yeah, so it would be great to hear more about your experience with SOA. So
I did not have any contact with SOA in that sense personally. So as I said, two of the students in my graduate school, they organized some kind of a summit, I don't know, and they went over there to Norway. And when they came back, they set this up. So they set it up under the name, the Nodes Network. I can put it up. Their website is still up there. I don't know whether they've continued, though, as I said, doing this facilitation between students and startups that they would get through SOA. But yeah, so my experience was I've worked with two startups, one in 2021, one in 2022. The first one was, so my research background is in physical oceanography, specifically looking at plastic pollution, transport, and and the first startup was a Norwegian startup that works on creating bioplastics from algae. So they wanted to have these were really research-based collaborations. They wanted research to be done that would meet their, that would support their company goals. It wasn't really that they were offering so much to the students as much as the students to them in terms of like data or information. But it was still a really great collaboration. So they basically wanted us to look at, we worked in a team of two students. So we looked at, how they could meet their growing demand of biomass in a sustainable way, what new markets they could look into. I don't know. I'm not really a seaweed specialist, but it was something that, you have the knowledge how to do that, a great experience, they left glowing reviews, so it was all great. And it was a great experience all around it. I think that went for about 3 months, the project. And then there was a second one, which was a little bit more challenging because this was a company looking at plastic credits through ESG scoring. But there was no way for PhD students at a graduate school to know how companies do their ESG scoring mechanisms, like looking at large financial institutions. They don't give you that information. So there was a little bit, I think, of a mismatch with the expectations and what we could really do. But it was still not a bad experience. And I think, it doesn't really fit in with what we're talking about here in terms of, like trying to facilitate big industry players creating more access to data to scientists. It's kind of like the other way around in that sense. But I think the kind of intermediary step of like connecting the academic researchers, especially early ones, to industry is a great approach to doing it. And I think especially having someone who does the facilitation where, you know, the contracts are set in that sense, it was paid. And you don't have to be scared of saying, you know, like, I don't, you know, these are my findings, or this is what I think should happen. In terms of, yeah, I'm the one that's very cynical of greenwashing, you know, so I'm a little bit, that's always something where I'm like, okay, that makes it a little bit tricky. I'm not like a purist that's anti, you know, companies doing company things. Obviously, there's a lot of companies that do really great things and share data really well, like Fugro does. But yeah, I don't know. I think there needs to be, especially with young researchers who are not necessarily super confident, but are probably most in need of access to data in early career situations, where they can feel empowered to be confident in how they interact with large companies. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and maybe, Emma, a point we can pick up in the task team as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. It sounds like something that's just from my point of view is that there is coming from science. So I came from science and then went into Fugro, and it's I was very cynical as well of greenwashing, and there's a certain element of shifting the cultural narrative that I had experienced all in the past, where big corporations or smaller industry it can be toxic, or that they always have a hidden agenda. But I really believe that there are people, and there are people that have, you know, a belief or that they want to change something. And the point that you mentioned about smaller, I don't think this is just about bigger industry. Smaller industry is just as important. Also leveling that playing field so that there's a competitive, it keeps it. That's what I think can help this. But it sounds like something that could be potential is ensuring that there is still this distinct separation, not separation, but just a distinction between the academic or the external researcher that's come in and the company. So then is that a way that you can encourage trust and ensure that you aren't, and that the work can be done so it's not greenwashed? I wonder, that's what I also took from your experience.
I mean that's been because I've done a little bit of consulting here and there in different places, and so it's been my approach more so that I've always been like, okay, if I'm going to be an independent consultant, it's easier for me to, you know, be free to say what I want to say in terms of the findings of my research, rather than being beholden to someone else's opinion of that. But at the same time, I'm also very much considering going into industry, and as I'm wrapping up my PhD now, and it's kind of, I think it's a very, like I said, it is a cynical way of looking at it. I'm very well aware of that, but it's, unfortunately, there are, you know, especially in some industries, there's patterns of that, you know, extractive industry. That's clear.
There is. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Thanks for your contribution and your comments. Being mindful of the time, Peer, you have your hands raised, and I think this time you raised it again. Do you have something that you would like to add?
Yes, absolutely. We don't have much time left, so I just drop it. When I said industry should be diversified, we usually refer to private sector instead of industry, because private sector is a better equivalent to academia on the other side. And that being said, there are two things that should be considered there. So on the private sector end, you've got very small businesses like startups, then you got the SMEs, and then you go into industry. For example, these are 3 steps or 3 categories. And all of these categories have different expectations with regards to science-industry collaboration, just as an example. So we just scratched the surface here, right? A startup has different expectations and goals and desires when going into a collaboration with science than industry has. And saying industry, or again, private sector, the next diversification besides size is, where are you active in the value chain? And I usually differentiate here into 2 types. Ones are the facilitators and the providers of technology, so to say, and others are end users in industrial value chain. And that also makes many of these discussions that we have today shine in a different light. So these, I appreciate that we have more sessions of that type, and it would be great to continue with these discussions at the major events, the major science events, for example. And I think through time, we then have a chance to really diversify and differentiate that topic more and more, as it deserves more detailed discussions and attention.
Indeed, yeah, that's the next step. Yeah, this is just the starting point, let's say. Great. 1.5 hours have passed. Great timing. Thanks for all of your inputs and comments, also to Pierre and Sarah, for both. I hope this was valuable to you. You learned something new, or maybe this raised more questions. Also, always good. If you have any further input, then yeah, you can reach us through also the ECOPS task team, or also on LinkedIn. Of course, if you want to connect, please feel free to do so. So yeah, thank you all. Thanks, Emma, for supporting as well. And then I wish everyone to still have a nice evening, a nice day, a nice morning, wherever you are. And see you at the next conference about this topic. Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Okay.